Welcome, everybody. So my name is Jeff Whitaker. I am on the Cloud Data Services team with NetApp. NetApp, if you aren't familiar, I'll do a quick one. We do storage systems, storage solutions, 27 years in the data center. Probably the last 7 years we've been doing solutions for the cloud, so I'm going to jump into that. With me here is Chuck Foley from Talon Storage. He'll jump up here in a minute and kind of take over and tell you some of the good stuff that's going on in the market. All right, so what we want to talk about is a customer situation, customer solutions with Azure NetApp Files. Azure NetApp Files is an offering. I'll get into some details here real quick before I hand it to Chuck. That is a Microsoft service that they offer file services and for a number of different use cases, which I'll touch on. But just to kind of get into NetApp on the cloud side of things, the NetApp Cloud Data Services team, which I'm a part of, really the focus that we come out with is really about deploying, running, managing, maintaining your data environments in the cloud. And the big focus is really about providing it as a service so that we can manage all the, watch out for my mic here, so that we can manage all of the environment for you. So essentially you don't have to go out there and do this, right? It's one of those, I think, an expectation when you're making that move into Azure, making that move into the cloud. There's a lot of things that you had to do in the past that you really don't want to handle. You want to make this simple and easy and let somebody else take care of some of the management worries. So just to kind of set the stage as to really what we were after when we came out with the service, it really was a struggle that we saw in the market with Microsoft saw, as well as we've seen with the cloud environments, and that's about addressing the file environments as you make a move to the cloud. One of the big ones, I think, that probably when the early public cloud environments, it was all about block and object. And I think that they had this grand view that object would solve the world's problems and no one needed files anymore. And I think we quickly learned that that really wasn't the case, right? We want to move these applications and they have requirements here and that doesn't quite solve it. So as we started to see a lot of stuff where we had a lot of application environments that we work with customers on, that a lot of that still remains. Over half of that still remains in the data center today. And of that, about half of all those application environments are file-based and solutions environments. And the big thing is as you start making that move in, you take these application environments, you take just general file environments, and you make that move into the cloud. You don't really want to sacrifice the performance that you've been capable of achieving, some of the reliability, availability features that you would expect in the data center. And then getting some of those management capabilities, right? You want to make sure that you can back up, you can take your snapshots of data, make sure that you have access to it and it's in a protected environment. So as you make that move in there, you have these capabilities built into your file environments. And a big one, a little squished here, but no one really wants to build and maintain. So if anybody's familiar with trying to move Linux environments into Azure, probably over the last couple of years, it's if you have any file requirement associated with a Linux platform, you got to build your own file server. And I don't know about you, but if I'm making the move into the cloud, I don't want to go build my own environment and have to maintain the patches and maintain the updates and do all of those types of things. That's what we're trying to move up there and get a service for. So that's where Microsoft and NetApp started working together on the cloud side of things. We've been working together for about 20 years for the data center and doing some integrations with a number of the different platforms that were data center based, but really coming down to putting our engineers together and coming up with a service that really could solve challenges for all these file environments, solve those challenges that the customers were seeing, and come out with the service called Azure NetApp Files. So just to simply level set with this, it's what we call, or Microsoft's terminology, is a powerful enterprise file storage service powered by NetApp. So when I say powered by NetApp, this is a first-party Microsoft service. You are buying it from Microsoft. It is in the Azure portal. It is something that you would get directly from them. Just because I'm with NetApp and talking about it, you don't actually buy anything from me. But we actually built the service with them. The technology that is utilized to create this environment is all built on NetApp inside of the Azure data centers. Oh, this screen kind of got all mungled together. I did a session yesterday and this didn't happen. So anyway, I'll just kind of walk through. Basically, this is around solving your Linux challenges in Azure, but as well, we do Windows-based environments, so we can solve the SMB challenges, the NFS challenges. And we recently rolled out NFS 4.1, and specifically, there's a big piece to solving that one, which I'll touch on in the blurred section here in the bottom. But one of the big things is doing this easily, right? Putting together an environment that was very simple for you to use. I'm not actually going to do a demo for you of the environment today, but we do have demonstrations in our booth, which is 1047 down there, and we can walk you through really how simple it is. We actually have a game down there that you can actually go through and deploy try to win a prize by deploying a volume. Whether you know anything about it or not, it's actually very easy to get through. But making it a very simple service to deploy, but then also having multiple performance tiers. So when you're looking at the type of applications that you're deploying, do you just have simple basic file shares that you need to access? We have a tier for that, our standard tier, which brings that, has a price point that can grow up to the upper tiers. We have the third tier, which is called our ultra tier. And that's for more of those high performance computing environments. We see the database type situations, those solutions in the mid tier is our premium tier. But it's one of those that you can kind of right size the performance level and the cost to the environment that you're trying to operate. Price per gigabyte per month. Some of the big focus areas under here in a little overlap section. SAP migration is a big one. We've actually seen with the higher performance tiers, we've got a lot of customers. I mean, I think anybody that's working in the SAP environments knows there's a big heavy shift and a big push to move into HANA over the next, I guess, 5 years and change now. And one of the big pieces there as you move into the cloud, there is a big expectation. There is actually certification requirements associated with SAP. And we actually Microsoft just announced yesterday that Azure NetApp Files is certified now as a production data source for SAP environments. And the big thing there is it gives scale-out capabilities. So for any of those people that are building single instance databases, you can now scale this to multiple instances from a single shared file because we can meet the performance requirements of the SAP infrastructure. Some other areas, as I said, Windows file, Linux file application environments, as well as databases, SQL environments, Oracle environments. VDI is one we've started to see a lot of customers trying to do those virtual desktop environments in Azure, being able to do this really quickly. We have some features built in there that allows you to clone data sets and replicate them so that you can actually spin up hundreds of actual virtual environments utilizing the same actual piece of data inside of your environment, so you don't actually have to pay for multiple copies of data sets, and we can clone this out extremely quickly. So it's a very quick way to actually spin out virtual desktop environments as well as like dev test environments. So if you're trying to validate some new application deployments, you can do that. And then some high performance computing, which I touched on. We also just announced a couple new regions. We went GA with the service about 4.5 months ago, and we had five regions that we were in. Now we're up to 11 regions across the globe, and continuing to roll more regions as the time goes on. Right, every month or so, we're rolling out new platforms, and just some customer evidence. We have Repsol. We have a video up. They were actually speaking in a couple of sessions with Microsoft this week, but they've actually gotten a considerable performance increase in Azure compared to what they were doing in the data center. And it was a surprise to them. And they've actually made a heavy shift to start moving some of their reservoir simulations and those things. And the Repsol's an oil and gas company out of Spain, but moving a lot of that stuff into Azure. Whoa, jumped too quick. All right, so from there, I want to introduce Chuck, let him come up here and talk to you about some of the cool things they're doing.
Hi guys, as Jeff said, I'm Chuck Foley from Talon Storage, and we are a NetApp technology partner. We fill a really specific role, which is to sit between Azure NetApp Files and users on planet Earth when you have requirements for users and client applications to access unstructured data shares in the cloud. Now, the reason we do this, quite honestly, is greed. It's about money. He showed you a slide that said 45% of enterprise workloads are file data. But what this slide didn't show is that the average workload for unstructured data is much bigger than a structured data workload. I mean, you've got users. They create stuff everywhere. Media, graphics, rich media, et cetera. So when you look at most enterprises, they say, I got a problem. 80% of my data is unstructured data, but the dirty secret is that the bulk of that unstructured data is probably not sitting in a well-managed data center or now, these days, cloud environment. It's spread around the world. It's, these distributed file servers, like Windows file servers that pop up like gremlins. You feed them at night, and all of a sudden, boom, boom, they're everywhere. We have customers that have hundreds. One of our customers, and I'll show you a slide in a little bit, 715 locations, 960 Windows file servers. That's a pain point for them, managing 960 instances of data. And more we see customers, and I'm going to show you, we're going to go deep into one of these customers that ask themselves the question, which is, in today's world of cloud infrastructure and managed infrastructure, is it smart that I continue to have these islands of data everywhere? Is it smart to spend the time, effort, money on managing that stuff and absorb that risk, especially in today's audit compliance and GDPR world? So I'm going to narrow it down from average customers to, in this case, one particular industry, which is an industry like design, engineering, manufacturing, people with users around the world and large files. If you know anything about this particular industry, and any industry faces this, there are certain industry trends which are pushing them. In the world of construction and design and product design, it's not only construction companies, manufacturing companies like Lego, for example, another customer that's doing this, that have certain trends that are really driving consolidation. They're driving consolidation into a single set of data that centers of competency around the world can use. They're driving consolidation into the cloud. And that becomes challenging when these data sets get really big. So a lot of people have said, I can use the cloud for certain things, especially if I have a cloud resident application using cloud resident storage. That's good. They're next to each other in a well-managed data center. But what if I have storage up there and users down here, and they're separated by literally hundreds of milliseconds or more? Well, it's laws of physics, right? There's not much you can do about the laws of physics. Distance equals latency, equals horrible performance, equals network delay and jitter, equals upset users and bad productivity and people losing their jobs. Maybe. We're going to focus on one of these customers. By the way, these are some examples of customers that are using what I'm about to tell you about. One of them we're going to focus, by the way, the smallest customer here is about 10, 12 sites. The largest is the one with 715 sites. They're all embracing this type of paradigm. So we're going to focus on one. It's a company called Robert Bird Group. They are a design firm with offices around the world. So their business problem, they have 16 locations around the world. They had file servers in each of those locations. They had all the problems that came with that. They were growing. They grew by acquisition. They'd buy new companies. Now we have a location in Sydney, and we have the infrastructure and the users in Sydney. How do we service those users with our IT infrastructure? Margin pressure means what used to do 6 months to do a piece of work, we now have to do in 4 months. We have to make better use of prior art. How do we use the data that we've accumulated and used before? And that means they have some infrastructure pressures. If you know anything about managing file servers, you know that infrastructure sprawl is the bane of most people in a large distributed enterprise. Big data sets, large footprints of data. They try to keep it as small as possible. They're trying to keep it under 10 terabytes per location, but even that is tough to do, especially because while distributed IT infrastructure became a big deal a few years ago, distributed IT staffing did not become a big deal. You might have 50 people or 100 or 500 people in IT, and usually they're in the data center or the main locations. You have 100 locations, you probably don't have IT people in all of those locations. And this particular industry is made even worse because they were forced to do what's called follow the sun collaboration. So if you know anything about the design industry, another customer that was up there is Foster and Partners. They built the new Apple campus in the Silicon Valley. If you saw that, an architectural marvel, looks like a spaceship, it's round, it was in all the news. It took like over a year to design and many years to build. They have parts of the world, like a center of competency in India, that might specialize in infrastructure, literally building stuff. Then you have another team in Israel that specializes in security and cabling, camera. They have another team in London that specializes in aesthetics, windows, doors. You have these distributed centers of competency, but they all need to work off of the same data. They literally were having to do what most of you would consider archaic, follow the sun, of you can work on it in this office for these hours. Then you have to do FTP, which takes some amount of time, and then the next time zone can work on it. And then you do an FTP and the next time zone can work on it. Kind of archaic in today's world, but you got to do what you got to do when you're faced with the laws of physics. So this in particular in Robert Bird, this was their conundrum. It's please, if you're a normal user, don't take this personally, but it's what we call stupid user tricks. It's where I've got 16 locations and somebody spills Diet Coke on a file server. Or a file server. Somebody says, we don't use that very much. We're going to use it for this other workload. Or Sally, the office admin, we find out that she hasn't backed it up for 6 months after it burns up. Or we've had customers that literally have said, where's the file server? It's gone. When's the last time you used it? Last week. All right, so what happened in the last week? I don't know, but it's gone. It was right there. Now it's gone. There are certain parts of the world where that's actually a valuable resource. Now, it's not the 5,000 or 10,000 for the file server. It's your risk and audit and compliance and GDPR and whose data was on that, et cetera, et cetera. These are the problems that they have, and this is why it costs so much to manage on-premise file servers around the world. So customers, in Robert Bird's case, they had an executive kind of architecture session and said there were some internal pressures which were moving upward, and there were external factors moving downward. What they realized a couple of years ago is that their confidence in the cloud was increasing. It really boils down to them saying, we're a design firm, we're not an IT company. Let's be a design firm and let the IT companies be an IT company. They also became very aware of what it was costing them as they grew to manage each and every different location. Their IT staff was growing because their trouble ticket list was growing because users in Sydney and New Delhi and Hong Kong were having issues that would be easily solved if Bob from IT could run down and fix it, but not when they're distributed around the world. And audit and compliance, especially, is using customers' data and GDPR being in different regions of the world. The external factors which are pushing downwards, it's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to use cloud storage, and some new technologies have removed the barriers to accessing cloud-based data. So what they wanted to say is, can I get rid of this? Can I move to this perfect world scenario where instead of having file servers around the world, can I have one global file server that all of my user population uses? And it's kind of like this. I have the fun opportunity to talk to customers around the world, pretty much large-size customers, Target, Toyota, Vistaprint, Lego Toys, London Stock Exchange, Expedia, and I ask a pretty regular question. I'll say, or set of questions. I'll say, how many locations do you have? Pick a number, 117. All right, how many file servers do you have? It's pretty much at least 117, maybe more. All right, I say, if you had 117 floors of a building in New York City, would you put a file server on every floor? Or would you just let them use one big file server in the basement? And they look at me like I'm an idiot, asking rhetorical questions, and they say, that's kind of stupid. Of course I'd use a big file server in the basement. So I ask them, in today's world, why don't you flip that model on its head and treat all the locations as if they're different floors of a building and use a file system on the roof or in the cloud? And that's what you have the ability to do today. And the payback is huge. I'm actually going to go through, in just a couple minutes, the payback numbers. So this approach says you build what we in the industry call a fabric. You build a visibility to a centralized file share or a set of file shares, and you give your users visibility and access to that at very high performance. I'm going to walk you through how it works, and we'll take a small example, because if I had 16 locations up here, it would look too crazy. So this is how it works at Robert Bird. We're going to pick 3 locations, A, B, and C. This is the before picture. This is bad. Now we got to fix it. So step 1, you create a file share in Azure NetApp Files. In their case, they have about 100 terabytes, replacing 16 separate file servers. Step 2, you move the data up there. There's lots of ways to do that. If you want offline, we can get together, I'll hang around for a little bit, and you can say, I have 5, 10, 20 terabytes at a location. What's the easiest way to get it up there? So now you have the data up in the cloud, which is good. You have users on-prem, which is bad. You got to fix that intermediary problem. So what you do, is you install a fabric, which is software-based. In essence, it means you put an instance of software in the cloud sitting next to the Azure NetApp Files instance. That's the traffic cop. Then you put an instance of software at every location, replacing what was the file server. So away goes a 10 or 20 terabyte file server. In its place might go a little Windows VM that might be 16 gig of memory, 250 gig of disk. Much smaller, easier, automatically managed. Users don't have access to touch it. That creates this visibility and access layer. The first job of that layer is to present a global namespace. Simply stated, it means everybody can see whatever directory structure you want them to see. It means the people in location A, B, and C can now see the same manufacturing folder, finance share, marketing folders, etc. So they have a global namespace. What happens when people start to use it, and how do you fix that laws of physics latency problem? So let's say that a user in location A navigates to a share. He's a designer, he goes to the engineering folder, goes to the open projects, and clicks on open project 123. First thing that happens, he's authenticated by Active Directory. This really doesn't work in the enterprise unless it's fully integrated with Active Directory, ACLs, GPOs, rule-based access, access-based enumeration, whatever layers and depths that you're using. For our purposes here, he's a good citizen and he's authenticated. Once he's authenticated, the file is opened in Azure NetApp Files. And a lock is put on that file, because that's what file servers do. That's how you prevent conflict. Then the distributed network file system, which is the next layer of technology, kicks in and says, wait a minute, before I maybe this is a 100 meg file. Before I transfer 100 meg over the network, has anybody in that location ever used that file before? Because if anybody has used that file before, the bits that represent that file are likely cached in that little software VM. As a data point for you, over hundreds of customers across the world, we see about an average 80% locality of reference. In layman's terms, that means 80% of the time somebody in location A clicks on a file, the bits that represent that file are already there because somebody's used it before in the last X number of months. That means this guy can be opening a 100 meg file from Azure NetApp Files, but no data really has to go across the network. The file lives up in the cloud, it's managed up in the cloud, its conflicts are managed in the cloud, but the bits are presented locally. He gets a local-like performance experience, but he has no file server on site. Now, if nobody in that location, and it's not just him, it's anybody, because remember, this is a file server replacement, there's no client software or agents. If nobody in that location has ever worked on that file, but it's a brand new project, then the data does have to come over the network. That we can't get around. But it will use an optimized protocol. It's got literally millions of man-hours of use to get the data from Azure NetApp Files to the edge location about an order of magnitude faster than a normal network connection experience would be. Again, that's about 20% of the time. Now, while he's using it, any changes that he makes, any saves, etc., those changes are delted back. So think about this. I opened a 100 meg file. Nothing had to come across the network. I make 1 meg of changes. Only that 1 meg needs to go back. The 1 meg that's different is differenced back the authoritative file up in Azure. That cuts network overhead and bandwidth and increases user experience. Now, while he's working on it, and this happens a lot in collaborative environments, let's say that somebody in location C decides they want to work on that file. Normally, that would be a conflict scenario. And most technologies available in the market have a last rider wins conflict resolution, which to me is not conflict resolution, it's conflict acknowledgement. But what would happen in this case is literally these two locations, which may be separated on other sides of the world, are treated like different floors of the building. User C gets a message, whatever his application dialog presents, but it's usually something like, that file is in use by user XYZ. Do you want a read-only copy or do you want to be notified when he's done? Let's say for hypothetical cases, the guy in location C says, just let me know when he's done. User A continues his work. Whenever user A is done, the final changes are differenced back to the authoritative file in Azure. The file is closed, the lock is released, and the location C will then get a message that says that file is available for you now, and he goes through the same process. Authenticate by Active Directory, open the file in Azure, lock the file centrally. Distributed network file system says, wait a minute, has anybody in location C ever used this file before? Right now the answer is going to be yes, but yes with an asterisk, kind of like Hank Aaron's record, because it's changed. So then just the difference, if location A made 1 meg of changes, just that 1 meg will go out as that local 100 megs being presented. So kind of goes like this. The guy in location C doesn't know that. He just hit file open and it opens. And he's opening literally the latest and greatest copy of the file. So by layering these technologies, and they're up at top right for those of you that like different layers of technology and wants to note what's used, those work together to say, I can get rid of that network of file servers, move it into a centralized footprint, take advantage of the kind of things that Jeff was talking about, which means I don't manage iron, I don't manage hardware, I don't manage snapshots and backups, I don't manage patches and updates, and I don't care. Well, okay, I do care how much I'm using, but I don't have to say I'm currently at X%, I gotta go buy more, and I gotta schedule it, and I gotta upgrade it, and I gotta spread my disk. No, Azure NetApp Files takes care of all that. This is what it looks like from a little deeper layer. So up in the cloud, you will have an instance of Azure NetApp Files. You'll break it into whatever shares you want, and you will front end that with an instance of the Talon Fast software. Interesting, we have really varied mixed workloads environments. Robert Bird is one example, but we have many others where they may be using Azure NetApp Files for cloud-based server resident apps that are doing their rendering and analysis, et cetera, but they also carve out user shares. It helps justify and spread the use of Azure NetApp Files. We even have customers that are doing VDI. Either they're doing VDI into the Azure data center. There's another interesting use case which I don't show here, but we have customers that will have regional instances of VDI. So I have, I have an Asia Pacific Azure data center instance of VDI. I have a Germany instance of VDI. I have a US East instance of VDI, and my regional users are going to that VDI instance to do much of their stuff. But when those VDI instances require large files and unstructured data, that VDI instance regionally also has the Talon Edge instance, which connects back to a centralized Talon core. So I can still have one Azure NetApp Files that is servicing VDI regional instances around the world. So you can get as fun and complex as you would like. The connection is secure. You can choose to either do an express route, you can do an MPLS, you can do a site-to-site or a point-to-site VPN, or if you have locations, and we do have some customers that do this, they might have 10 or 15 users in a location, they just have a public internet connection, and they'll do SSL. So from a security perspective, your data is protected at rest. I'll let Jeff talk about Azure NetApp Files and encryption and all that kind of stuff. It's encrypted at transit, and I'm sure at the desktop you're taking valid steps to keep your data protected while it's in use. At the edge, there is that Talon software instance. Again, you're replacing a file server with a VM. It is a Windows VM. We can provide it as a VHD or an OVA. You can do it as an application installer. Kind of defeats the purpose of making it super easy, however. And it can run under either Hyper-V, VMware, or a number of other major hypervisors. But with us, it's a 95% case of being either VMware or Hyper-V. The results, I'll let you read these. The good news is that they've literally moved over 100 terabytes from on-premise into the cloud. When they move that 100 terabytes, and again, right here, we're focusing on user-based data. We're not even talking about server apps mounting shares. We're talking stuff that you and I would go and navigate to a file server and go to a share and go to a folder and hit file open. They've moved over 100 terabytes up into the cloud. What they've experienced is that, number one, there's not a performance difference discernible by their users. Number two, there is a business agility difference. They have users saying, my life is so much easier because when I'm working on a project with someone in another location, it's like we're in the same location. The other benefit is they tried other solutions before, and some of you guys might have tried solutions that are not file servers. There's some other internet-based service which has a different interface, a different workflow. The users have to do something different. This looks like a file server. File, open, X drive or manufacturing folder, boom, it's done. One of the hue and cries that they got from their users early on as they tried to solve this problem a couple years ago was, we want our yellow folders back. We like yellow folders. Show them to me on Windows Explorer or in my application. Now they have that. So overall, this is a huge success case. And it also saved them money. So this is the other thing I want to share with you. How am I doing on time? 15, good. The other thing is, does it make sense? So there was a white paper done last year by an industry analyst firm called Storage.io. I think, actually, they changed the name to Server and Storage.io. Some of you may use them and read their stuff. They did a white paper to define the methodology to ascertain the ROI of moving on-premise file servers into the cloud. So you can find it, I think it's storage.io.com. If it's not storage.io.com, it's serverandStorage.io.com. It was published in September of last year. And they said, what is it, how do you, because most of you guys, nobody's thought about that for a long time because file servers were a necessary evil, so why rub it in? Why determine the cost when I can't do anything about it? Well, now you can. So what they've walked through is that it cost money to have file servers sitting on site. And it's not only the cost of the hardware and the depreciation. It is things like the management of it. That's probably the single biggest cost. According to Gartner, one person can manage between 300 and 400 terabytes. So you take the cost of a storage admin, and they can manage X. By the way, if you spread that out, it gets worse, because one guy can manage 300 to 400 terabytes if it's in my data center and it's right here. You spread that across 100 locations, I can't do that by myself. I need to hire somebody else or two somebody else's. It's the systems infrastructure, the networking ports, the maintenance dollars that you might pay, the availability dollars on backup and recovery and clustering and disaster recovery planning, and now security and compliance and audit. I don't know which number you want to use. Storage.io published a number of $2,113 per terabyte per year. That's what it costs to own enterprise storage. Gartner in 2017 said it was $2,500. Pick a number. Pick your number. By the way, the methodology will walk you if you want to develop your own number. How do you develop your own number? But if you want to do a quick analysis, you can use an industry number and say, I have X number of terabytes. How much is it costing me? And then you compare that to what it costs to run in the cloud. I didn't have the whole methodology here because you can get it on the website, but this is Robert Bird. With Robert Bird, they said it saves them almost $600,000 over 3 years by moving this workload into the cloud. This accommodates not only Azure NetApp Files, it accommodates the Talon software, it accommodates the network overhead, it accommodates the egress charges. You guys familiar with something called egress charges? If you've done stuff like that, you know that if I'm a hyperscaler, I'll take your data for free, but I'll give it back at a cost. Right? So when you're reading data out of the cloud, in most situations, unless you're reading it to another of the hyperscalers' data centers, you're going to pay for that. One of the neat things is when you're caching at the edge and 80% of the data that your users are using, the bits are already there, you get the benefit of centralization with far less egress costs. So that all factors in. And in Robert Bird's case, you're looking at, and this is not a large company, 16 locations. It's a really awesome company, and they're very cool, and we love working with them. And they're advanced in some of their business and technology approaches. But when you take these numbers and you run on some of our customers that have 100 and 200 and 900 file servers, these numbers get really big. It's really interesting what you can do with those dollars in other areas of your IT infrastructure if you're saving that from what it's costing me to manage. Look, I'm sorry, but anybody want to manage copiers? Fax machines? No. Guess what? On-premise distributed file servers, it's kind of in the same bucket these days, right? You got to give users the access to the data, but do you really want to manage that layer of infrastructure? Here's the good news. It's wildly cost justified. So you can go to the Storage.io site. If you like, we have a calculator that kind of put it together. You can get with me afterwards. But there are lots of people doing this around the world. There are lots of people that have chosen to get rid of distributed points of storage where their users are and give them centralized, localized access. It works, it's high performance, it's a big cost savings, and it's a great use case for Azure NetApp Files. Because for us, and we've been doing this for a few years, we are excited about Azure NetApp Files because it's the first time that we were actually able to tell customers, you can get rid of your on-premise file servers and have somebody else manage it. For a couple years, we were saying you can get rid of your on-premise file servers and have only one place to manage it. And that's good in and of its own right. You know, if I can get rid of 100 file servers and manage one place for backup management, capacity management, availability management, audit compliance, and GR, that's good. It's even better if I can say I can get rid of those file servers and have Microsoft take care of that pain for me because they're running Azure NetApp Files and they're doing updates and patches and growth and expansion and availability and all that kind of stuff. That's the biggest trend that we see. So that's one user's journey through this. I think we have time for any questions and Q&A.
Real quick, so yeah, thank you, Chuck. One thing I want to jump in before is, first of all, I've gotten the question probably, I don't know, every single time I present. It's like, hey, can we just utilize the file environment up in the cloud and have my locations access the data from there? And the biggest piece is always, yes, but can you deal with the latency? And in this case, you can actually address that latency challenge, which is, you know, you don't know until you find out. It's like, oh, okay, so the user access time to open a file is going to take you how long if you're, you know, 100 miles or 200 miles from a data center. Whereas, you know, this has really been a big one for us to open up those opportunities to get rapid access to files anywhere that you're located. So,
or thousands of miles. I mean, literally,
yeah, thousands of miles.
This is most of our customers are using this across not only states but across continents and oceans.
So before you jump to questions, one more thing. If you, we do have a couple more. Actually, you know, go ahead and answer. Go ahead with questions. I'll get to that part right before we finish.
So for the folks that have implemented this, how are they dealing with remote users?
Like one-off standalone users? Good question, because look, there are different layers in an IT infrastructure, and I cannot say this is a panacea that solves everybody. So a guy on a train is not the primary use case for this. The primary use case for this is the layer of the enterprise infrastructure that's called a file server. People that are having highly mobile users and small users will often, and we do have customers doing that. Great example is somebody that's in the property management world, and another one's in the marketing world where they have a highly distributed workforce. So they say, okay, I have 15 people, but they're in the southeast of the US. And I want all my data in Azure US West, which I guess is Redmond. They will put, instead of having to put a Talon software instance at each of those locations, they will find a regional point of presence, and they'll put a Talon Edge and a POP there. Because if I have home workers or 2- and 3-man offices that I don't want to put a Windows instance there, I'll put it into a regional data center that might be 20 to 35 milliseconds latency versus the 125 milliseconds latency there. Look, honestly, it's not as good as accessing in my own building at 1 to 2 milliseconds, but it's a whole lot better than having to go over the network, and they find acceptable performance. I'm not going to say it's nearly as good as you have on-premise, but a regional approach, and the good news is with Azure's expansion and Microsoft's infrastructure and points of presence, that has become much more of a reality now than it was 2 and 3 years ago. Zero. Yeah, one of the design points of this was, and some of us come from a world of living through agents and et cetera, and oh my God, you get to where you have 20 and 30 and 50 and 100,000 users in enterprise, and that's a nightmare, and it's a liability we didn't want. So this is totally transparent at the user level. They're using anything from Adobe to Office to CAD/CAM applications to analysis applications. Now, it's just looking for an SMB share like it always has. Oh yeah. But so this solution cut its teeth on AutoCAD, Revit, Bentley, SolidWorks, because they have a really massively acute problem, which is really big files, sometimes nested files. So I was talking to a customer in Australia the other day that literally has 14 gig files. If you're familiar with the CAD world, really big, and they're like nested projects, but it's viewed as one file. So yes, not only that, but the advanced implementations, like if your Bentley has something called, Revit Workshare, I think is what it's called. Really advanced implementations, but WSP Group, which has 220 locations around the world, is a huge user of that Foster and Partner switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from this switch where the value proposition has gone from I have to do collaboration between 12 offices to I need to get rid of infrastructure at 100 offices, but it all works the same. The technology applies itself the same in either location. So you can be really comfortable with CAD/CAM, big files, nested files, that kind of thing. Yes? We deal with unstructured data, not structured data. And the reason is the locking mechanism between a file share and a database is different. The semantics are different, and it doesn't lend itself as well to that. So we've kind of made a decision that we're going to deal with that which we can absolutely crush, and we're not going to find ways to accommodate that. So if you've got Access databases or SQL databases, our recommendation is you have some local presence of for example, a Windows Server infrastructure that may be running SQL Server or Access, and that's under one VM, and on the same machine you have the Talon VM. It's transparent to the users. When they're using the database, they're hitting this one that's running Access. When they're hitting the unstructured file shares in the cloud, they're hitting that one. It's kind of the best way to get there from here. Any others? Yeah. Okay. What is it called? Adept. I'm not familiar with Adept, so I could talk to our support guys and say, do you know any of these? So that would be a back-end function. We're literally taking the place of the file server, which is now in the cloud. So this kind of obviates the need in many cases for check-in, check-out. In some cases, it will work with it. A lot of the check-in, check-out document management solutions use an underlying SMB share or SIFT share. In that case, you would actually probably be using Adept in one place instead of a bunch of places. You would be using Adept, or we have customers with other document management solutions that are running that in the cloud on an SMB share in the cloud, because that's all done up here. When a user navigates to a share and asks for that file to be open, the request goes up here for it to be open, which means it's going to hit the Adept or the document management up here, which is then going to get it off of the SMB share. So that's an architecture I could have our team look at with you if you're interested. Yes?
Does not support SnapLock right now. One of the things that when it comes to the Azure NetApp Files, this is an Azure service. It is all through the Azure portal piece of it. So some of the functionality that you may expect directly in a system, you don't have that level of access through the actual Azure interface. But there are features and things like as time goes on, maybe that's something that comes out of it. But as of now, there is no SnapLock on that.
Second? Either one. We have customers running both, or we have customers federated with Active Directory domain services and AAD in the cloud.
So SnapMirror is, again, one of those, so I'll go kind of a couple pieces here. So SnapMirror is a very specific service that goes deep into the systems. So SnapMirror is our replication model from system to system. We don't currently have that support in Azure NetApp Files. We definitely are building a solution to solve that is integrated. Right now we recommend a service we call Cloud Sync, which actually does file sync between multiple locations. But we are integrating an actual replication model that'll be region-to-region replication for Azure NetApp Files.
And in that scenario, you're not doing it anymore across 160 locations. You're doing it between Azure location A and Azure location B. Yes?
So clarification on remote access. Say I'm working in here. It sounds like I'm not worried about speed. I just need to get to the data. And I want to go straight to the cloud.
You can do that.
Is that up to me, like VPN or whatever?
That's up to you.
Provide a portal or something?
No. You can VPN in. We do have a portal. Most of our customers don't do that. They will be. Oh yes, we have a portal. You can come in through a portal. You can VPN directly. You can VPN or SSL to a local data center that might have a Talon Edge. You can go right to the Azure NetApp Files. One of the neat things about this is the Talon architecture supports not only access from all those users in the world, but any native access from another application, or if you're a user in the Azure data center, like in the VDI world, you don't have to go through the Talon infrastructure. So you could go in directly. You're just another user on that SMB share. All the semantics are under.
So I'll say real quick, more questions come up. We'll want to wrap this one up. Come up and ask them personally. I do want a couple of things. At 5 o'clock today, I have a session if we want to get into a little more detail on the SAP side of things. That's at Theater 2. And as well, tomorrow there is another customer session that's at 1 o'clock and 3:04 that it will be the Repsol oil and gas, so a high-performance environment. They will be actually talking, it's actually with Microsoft in that case, but so they'll be going through how Azure NetApp Files solved a number of their challenges there. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it very much.